I spent my entire life supporting my husband and children, believing that was my whole life. My son, who graduated from an engineering college in Seoul and worked for a major corporation, was the brightest gold medal pinned to my chest. However, that medal shattered into pieces in an instant. He returned after losing all his assets and getting a divorce, becoming a monster at 42 who leech off his 68-year-old parents. I felt like a fool for having come to support him out of pity for such a child. But then, I heard news that felt like the sky was falling. It was a verdict that I was gradually forgetting even who I was. This is the painful confession of our family, which began anew as memories faded. I am now sharing that burning and undeniable truth that while memories may disappear, love never does. Before I begin this story, please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. This is a channel that delivers the hidden stories of ordinary people every day. I am Jung Myung-ja, 68 years old this year. Lately, I sometimes dream of smelling that scent. I mean that urgent and heavy smell of machine oil. In my younger days, I hated it so much. When my husband returned from the factory, that smell would greet us even before we opened the front door. It was the stench that had permeated every single one of his work clothes, the terrible grime that had settled pitch black in his hair and the wrinkles on the backs of his hands. I hated it so much that I washed my husband's clothes dozens of times a day. No matter how much I boiled, rinsed, or simmered them, the smell simply wouldn't go away. But you know what? Looking back now, that was the smell that fed our family. It was all thanks to that musty odor that a new family member could survive without going hungry. At the time, I had no idea that the smell of grease emanating from my husband's back was the fragrance that sustained our home. My husband ran a small factory. It wasn't very big. In its early days, it was just a small parts factory with about 15 employees, but my husband would leave at 6 a.m. and wouldn't return until past 10 p.m. He didn't have any separate days off. After all, he was the kind of person who wouldn't rest until he stopped by at least once a day, even during the Chuseok holiday, because he was worried about the sound of the machinery running. He was a very reserved person. He never once gave a warm hug or spoke affectionately to me. I knew that being awkward at expressing affection was just his nature, but at first, it really hurt my feelings. Not long after we got married, I once gave a speech to my mother. She smiled and said, "Does your son-in-law gamble? Does he ever stray? As long as he stays focused on the family, that's enough. What more could you ask for?" She was right. My husband never once strayed in his entire life. He never missed a single month's pay for his employees, and he always made sure to handle business with clients, even if he was sick. Days of waking up at dawn to leave, returning late at night to eat a quick meal, and then collapsing into sleep. He must have thought that living like that was the natural thing to do. After all, as the head of the household, it was his duty. I thought it was the only natural thing to do, too, because everyone lived that way back then. For me, living as a business owner, being a good wife and a good mother was my entire life. I was truly happy when my husband polished off a bowl of rice in no time, or when my son held out his plate, asking me to grill the meat for him. Back when the factory was running well, laughter never ceased in our home. Whenever my husband brought home a bonus, we would take our son to a rib restaurant. My husband, usually quite strict, would grill meat for our son on those days, pushing the plate towards him and telling him to eat a lot. My son ate with delight, and just watching the father and son together was enough to fill me up. That scene is still vivid in my mind. Whenever my husband talked about his factory, a smile would bloom on his usually stoic face. It made me feel good too. I thought, that is what pride is to him. The sound of the machinery echoing throughout the factory was our family's pride. We believed that as long as that sound didn't stop, our home would always be fine. We had only one son. Since he was a child we had with difficulty after several pregnancies following our marriage, he was a truly precious child to us. My husband was very strict with our son. He would scold him severely if he didn't do well in his studies, and he would even spank his calves for a single lie. That is just how fathers raised their children back then. But deep down, you have no idea how much he cherished our son. On the day our son brought home an award from school, my husband simply said, "That's enough," at the dinner table. But that night, he shrugged his shoulders and said to me, "My son is quite something, isn't he?" He simply couldn't express it. It wasn't that he didn't care. I knew that. Our son probably didn't know, though. My husband wanted our son, at least, not to live the way he did. He desperately wanted him to live without getting his hands dirty with grease. He wanted him to sit in a clean office wearing a tie, instead of a life kneeling on the factory floor staring at machinery. That must be why he constantly told him to study. Knowing his heart, I always told our son, "Your father isn't strict. He cherishes you. His voice is loud, but his heart isn't cold." I don't know how much our son understood. He just nodded and slipped right into his room. I lived a very busy life back then. I would wake up at the crack of dawn, pack a lunch, wake my son up to send him to school, clean, do the laundry, and whip up side dishes in between before getting ready for dinner. Only after setting the table for my husband when he came home and helping my son with his homework would I finally sit alone to watch TV and fall asleep. There were no holidays in housekeeping, but I rarely thought of it as difficult. That was my job, and doing it well was my reward. Just seeing my husband come in, saying I'm home, and quietly eat his meal made me feel like I had spent another good day. It made me truly happy when my son took off his shoes and said I'm home. Those small, everyday moments were my happiness. I still think about it sometimes. If only I could go back to that time, I would have held on to those smelly work clothes a little longer. Instead of trying to wash them away quickly, I would have tried to feel the meaning of that smell more deeply. When I heard my husband entering the front door after work, I would have said one more affectionate word, "Welcome home." Back then, I was living such a busy life that I didn't realize how precious those moments were. Everything just passed by as if it were taken for granted. I took it for granted that my husband would leave for the factory early in the morning again tomorrow. Back then, I truly didn't realize how precious a gift that ordinary day was, until the sound of the factory machinery stopped. Our son graduated from engineering school. It was a university in Seoul. My husband didn't say a word at the dinner table. He just picked up his spoon and ate silently. But that evening, my husband made a phone call to the factory. He called the longest-serving employee there. My son got accepted to an engineering school in Seoul. That was all? I heard it while doing the dishes in the kitchen. Knowing how much love was packed into that short remark, I held back the tears welling up in my eyes. My husband changed a little after our son entered university. It wasn't that he became more talkative. How could a naturally taciturn person suddenly become chatty? However, whenever the owners of the factory's clients gathered, stories about our son must have slipped out without him even realizing it. How did I know? I heard it all later from the wives of the clients. Your husband boasted about your son so much that he praised him endlessly, saying he was attending a prestigious engineering university in Seoul? Hearing that, I chuckled to myself. It made me realize that he didn't say a word at home, but acted that way when he was out. It was the same with the employees. On the day our son briefly visited the factory during his vacation, my husband reportedly whispered to the staff, "Here's our son. He's studying in Seoul." They said that even though he tried to act nonchalant and indifferent, he couldn't hide the smile blooming on his face. After graduating, our son got a job at a major corporation. On the day the acceptance announcement came out, I ended up sobbing uncontrollably. As expected, my husband didn't say a word. He simply ate a heartier bowl of dinner than usual. That was his unique way of celebrating. Our son was truly diligent at work as well. He never worked overtime or went on business trips, yet he never once complained. Seeing that, I thought he really did take after his father. Then, the person he met at work was none other than his daughter-in-law. I was told she was a colleague from the same department. When he first brought her over to greet us, she made a very sharp and pleasant impression. She spoke articulately, and her attire was so neat. She was a talented woman who had even graduated from graduate school. That day, too, my husband didn't say much, just ate with her and saw her off. However, after she left, he said one thing to me. She seemed fine. To him, that was the highest compliment. I still cannot forget the wedding day. There were so many guests. Everyone gathered without exception, from my husband's clients to the factory employees. As my husband shook hands with every guest arriving at the entrance of the wedding hall, his face looked incredibly angry. It was the first time in my entire life that I had ever seen him smile so broadly. Looking at my husband's face that day, I felt a lump in my throat thinking, this man is truly happy today. The moment our son exchanged vows and held my daughter-in-law's hand, I finally burst into tears that I had been holding back. My husband, who was standing beside me, gave me a quiet scolding. "Why are you crying?" His voice was clear, but his eyes were already flushed red. I simply pretended not to notice. That was the only way to save his pride. It was from that moment on. Whenever people around me asked about my son, my shoulders would puff out with pride. Everyone at gatherings talks about their children, from my son, who works at a major corporation, to his capable daughter-in-law. So-and-so's daughter married here, or so-and-so's son is at this job. In such settings, I always had something to say with confidence. Looking back now, it is truly shameful. They say you shouldn't brag about your children carelessly, yet I lived treating my son's success like a medal pinned to my chest. I suppose I lived boasting about a gold medal that looked like it could shatter at any moment. Whenever my son's maternal relatives came down for the holidays, the house would light up brightly. My daughter-in-law would diligently help with the work, while my son would sit beside his father and chat softly about what was going on at the company these days. My husband just silently nodded, as if he were listening or not, but perhaps because he was in a good mood that day, he accepted a drink, something he rarely did. I would often peek into the room while carrying food from the kitchen. The sight of father and son sitting side by side, sharing a drink, was so heartwarming that I thought, we have lived well enough. This is sufficient. Back then, I truly believed that. But you know what? That gold medal wasn't real gold. It was merely glittering on the surface. I found out the truth one day when I received a phone call from my daughter-in-law. The factory began to decline one day, suddenly. The supplier we had been doing business with this year vanished without a trace. The entire volume of goods my husband had trusted and supplied on credit was lost. It wasn't just a small amount. At first, my husband tried his best to hold on somehow. He looked for other clients and secured loans, without letting the employee show even the slightest sign of his distress. He was shouldering that heavy burden all by himself. But in the end, he couldn't hold on any longer. I heard that on the day the factory closed, my husband gathered the employees, tossed out a single word of apology, and then turned away, unable to find the words to say anything more. Later, an employee who was close to me called to say hello and relayed this story. Upon hearing it, I could barely bear to look my husband in the face. How much harder must it have been for someone who lived with the pride of never having missed a single employee's salary in his life to utter that single word of apology? Eventually, to pay off the debt, we had to sell the apartment we had lived in for over 20 years. It was a home filled with layers of our family's history, where we sent our son to school and spent the holidays. We packed up to move. My husband said nothing, and I kept my mouth shut as well. While carrying our belongings, a photo of our son from his elementary school days came out of an old box. That picture of him smiling angrily. I stared at it for a long time, then simply and quietly pushed it back into the box. The new place we moved to was a small 2-room villa. Once we had unpacked, the house felt completely full. The living room in our old house never felt this cramped. After finishing organizing, my husband stared out the window for a long time before finally saying, "It's fine. We can live here without any trouble." I held back my words and couldn't answer. From that day on, my husband started working as a security guard. A man who had spent his entire life as a boss was now stepping out the front door wearing an apartment security uniform. On the first day he left in that uniform, I saw him off, but I felt like I was about to burst into tears. Afraid my husband would see me off, I quickly hid inside the house. I too found a job. It was in the kitchen of a neighborhood restaurant. My job involved closing the grills and washing dishes. At first, my hands were completely chapped. The backs of my hands cracked and stung, making it hard to bear. But it was okay. I had to earn money too. Then, one afternoon, my husband had already gone out to work as a security guard, and I was catching my breath at home for a moment before heading to work at the restaurant. Just then, the phone rang. It was my daughter-in-law. "Mother, it's me." Her voice sounded strange. The child, usually brighter and clearer than anyone, had a hoarse throat. "Why? What's wrong?" A brief silence followed. Then, the sobs she had been holding back burst out. "Mother, I'm having such a hard time." At that moment, I felt as though my heart had sunk. Unable to say a word, I just clutched the phone in my hand tightly. The story was long. Crying for a long time, my daughter-in-law poured out the details of what had happened. She said it started with stocks. Her son had started a little bit, and it seems he made some money at first. That was the root of the problem. She said that because it was profitable, he became greedy, and as he went further, he even dabbled in cryptocurrency. "Mother, he even put our house's Johnson deposit into it behind my back." At those words, I was left breathless. "How much did you put in?" "All of it?" She added that he had borrowed from colleagues at work and even incurred debt. She said her son had quit his job as well. She voluntarily gave up that respectable job, the position that was her parents' only pride. My hand holding the phone trembled. I didn't even know where to begin or what to ask. I just silently listened to the pitiful sound of my daughter-in-law's sobbing coming from beyond the phone. That wasn't the end of it. She brought up the topic of children as well. She said she didn't want a child, considering her current situation where her work and career were so precious. She thought of a child as something insignificant. However, she said her son desperately wanted one. She told me that it was a very old conflict. We fought over that every single day. Mother, I'm exhausted now and can't do this anymore. As I listened to her, I thought of my son. How much must he have wanted my child? My heart ached as I pictured my son, holding back those feelings, unable to even voice them, swallowing them all inside. Yet on the other hand, I also understood my daughter-in-law. After all, she wasn't wrong about a single thing she said. I couldn't take either side. Mother, I'm going to get a divorce. When those words came out, I was truly speechless. It was only after a long time that I finally managed to part my dry lips. Yes, it must have been very hard for you. That was all? I had nothing more to add. After hanging up, I sat there for a while, rooted to the spot. I rested my cell phone on my lap and stared blankly at the empty bottle. That shining gold metal, which looked as if it would shatter at any moment. That precious metal had been completely shattered into pieces that day. Some time later, my son arrived. He stood there, having divorced, carrying nothing but a single suitcase. He was 42 years old. When I saw my son's face at the entrance, I couldn't say a word. I simply told him to come in. My husband turned his back and didn't even look at our son. A new family member had gathered in that cramped villa. And so, an uncomfortable cohabitation began. It was a small villa with only 2 rooms. My husband and I used the master bedroom, while our son occupied the smaller room. My son had come home carrying nothing but a single suitcase, but after a few days, his room quickly filled up. Packages arrived one by one, followed by a huge monitor, a gleaming keyboard, and even a gaming chair. I watched it without saying a word. I thought, how much pain must he be feeling to act like that? Looking back now, I regret it. I should have firmly told him he had to take care of himself, but I just thought he would get back on his feet after a rest. At the time, that was all I thought. My son's days were always the same. He would wake up around midday, eat, and then slip into his room, never to come out all night. Only unpleasant game sounds leaked through the crack in the door, the sound of typing, and incomprehensible noises emanating from the computer. We rarely turned on the lights in the living room to save on electricity. My husband and I would sit in the pitch-dark living room with the TV volume turned down as low as possible, staring blankly. Yet, through the crack in my son's room door, the flashing light from his game monitor seeped out all night long. How cruel that light felt to me. We lived in hushed silence with the lights off, yet my husband remained silent, thinking, they are doing that in that room all night long. He looked as if his eyes were fixed on the television, but his mind was elsewhere. In the mornings, my husband was the first to wake up. He would change his clothes and quietly leave the house. Often, he would leave without even eating a proper meal. Even when I hurried up and set the table, he would say, "It's fine. I'm just going out," and walk away. Whenever I watched his retreating figure, my heart felt like it was crumbling to shreds. I, too, would head straight out to the dining room. From 10 a.m. to 9 p.m., my hands would be swollen from closing mountains of grills and washing dishes. Yet, I went out every single day without rest. That is how my husband and I, the two of us, managed to feed our new family and cover living expenses using our pensions. Feeling sorry for our son, I secretly took out small amounts of my hidden emergency money and slipped them to him. I told him to at least do it when he went for a job interview. My son avoided my gaze and pocketed the money. Sometimes, he even took it from my wallet. Even when a few 50,000 won bills disappeared from my wallet on the dining table, I pretended not to notice. I thought he must be desperate to even take his mother's money. It was only later that I found out that some of that money was going into buying game items for my son. He was using the money he earned cleaning restaurant grills to buy a single game knife for his son, who had lost his 40s. When I found out, I simply couldn't say a word. It was all my own doing. I had absolutely no idea what to say or how to say it. Eventually, my husband, unable to bear it any longer, snapped first. It was one evening. My husband came home exhausted after finishing his security job, and the sound of that damn game was leaking out from our son's room again. My husband stopped dead in front of the room and pounded on the door. Roughly. "Hey, Jo Hyun-min." When there was no answer, perhaps because our son was wearing headphones, my husband flung the door open. I'm nearly 70, yet Mom and Dad are working themselves to the bone outside. Are you even worthy of being called my own child? I never raised you like that. My husband's voice was trembling. Whether he was angry or sorrowful, it was probably both. Our son didn't look anywhere. He just stared blankly at the monitor screen. My husband closed the door and came out. The bang shook the entire house. I was in the kitchen, listening to the noise, and stopped what I was doing, standing there for a long time. From that day on, father and son did not speak to each other. Even when they sat together at the dinner table, they didn't exchange a single glance. My husband treated our son as if he didn't exist, and the son would shove chestnuts into his mouth and hide straight into his room. Caught between them, glancing nervously, I tried to force a conversation. "It's cold today," or "Are the side dishes a bit salty?" But the atmosphere did not lighten at all. The weight of the meal felt incredibly heavy. Every night, our son watched cryptocurrency YouTube videos. I put on my earphones and lay in bed, staring at that screen for hours. Sometimes, when the door was slightly ajar, the sound would leak out. It will definitely rebound this month. This is the bottom. It is a chance to buy at the low point. Every time I heard those words, my heart sank. It was because those very words had ruined my child like that, and they were the ones that ultimately caused us to lose our entire fortune, yet he was listening to them again, even though he knew it all too well. One time, I mustered up the courage and cautiously spoke to him. "Hyun-min, please stop watching that YouTube. It just makes me feel worse." When my son didn't answer, I swallowed hard and finally said what I really wanted to say. "And are you looking for a job? You need to pull yourself together and start working somewhere. Mom and Dad can't keep supporting you forever." At that, my son frowned and snapped back. You don't know. You don't know what kind of situation I'm in right now, so why do you keep nagging me? I have my reasons for doing this." I could not say a word more at that lie. Perhaps it was true. After all, I truly did not know what was inside that child's heart. During that time, I could not sleep every night. I lay beside my husband, staring blankly at the ceiling. Listening to the faint sound of typing coming from the other room, I thought, what on earth did I do wrong? Where and how did I raise this child incorrectly? Should I have been harsher? Or should I have embraced him more warmly? No matter how much I agonized over it, there was no answer. My husband seemed unable to sleep either. His breathing was so silent. It was not the sound of a sleeping person. We were both lying there, keeping awake through the night with half-closed eyes. Even though we knew perfectly well that the other was awake, we did not exchange a single word. That deep silence was truly long and heavy. On his days off, my husband would always come to the restaurant where I worked to meet me, right on time for my shift. He would stand silently and reassuringly in front of the restaurant, and I would take off my apron and go out. That is how we walked home, side by side. There was no special conversation. We simply walked side by side, matching our strides. Sometimes, we would stop by the supermarket to buy a block of tofu or a carton of eggs. My husband would carry the heavy items, while I stood there holding just a light plastic bag. I really liked those times. It was the only time of day when we could finally breathe freely. Because, once we got home, that heavy, stifling air would be waiting for us again. But it was around that time that I started acting a bit strangely. At first, I thought it was just because I was tired. After all, the work was long overdue, and working in a restaurant kitchen was no easy task. Then one day, while making soup, I poured in an enormous amount of salt. I couldn't remember at all if I had added it once or twice. My son scooped up a spoonful of soup, frowned, and snapped at me. "Mom, what does this taste like? It's so salty I can't eat it, seriously." I was flustered and apologized, but deep down I found it strange and wondered why I was acting this way. After all, I was someone who had never once gotten the seasoning wrong in my entire life. A few days later, I had the gas on and was staring blankly out the window. I don't know how long I stood there. When my husband came home from work, he spoke in surprise. "You left the gas on." That was when I snapped back to reality. Oh my, why am I acting like this? The pot was burnt black. My husband turned off the heat without a word, but his eyes were different from usual. They were filled with deep worry. "What are you thinking about that makes you so spaced out lately?" I pretended not to hear him and turned my head away. One weekday, on my way to work, I boarded the bus only to suddenly feel like I hadn't brought my wallet. I distinctly remembered putting it in my bag, but I couldn't find it. Eventually, I got off the bus and rushed back home. I rummaged through my bag again, and there it was, still there. It had been in the bag from the very beginning. Standing there blankly, I thought, why am I acting like this? Why am I like this? I don't know how many times I repeated those words to myself. There were even times when I repeated what I had just said. While talking to my husband about work at the restaurant, I ended up repeating the exact same thing twice, and his expression seemed to stiffen. "You just told me that." I laughed it off. Oh dear, I guess I really am getting old. My husband simply nodded, but his eyes weren't smiling at all. My forced smile didn't last long either. Then, one evening, I was looking for my cell phone. I was certain I had been holding it just moments before, but I absolutely could not remember where I had put it. I frantically searched back and forth between the living room, kitchen, bathroom, and master bedroom several times. Watching this, my son, who was leaning on the sofa, smirked and said, "Mom, you're holding it in your hand. Are you seriously getting dementia? What's wrong with you? You're really embarrassing the neighborhood." Those words pierced my heart like a dagger. Embarrassing. That word hurt so much. I stood there speechless, staring blankly, when my husband suddenly sprang to his feet. "You brat!" His booming voice echoed throughout the house. "Are you ashamed in front of your mom right now? You're the one who's ashamed. A 2-year-old kid leeching off his parents and saying he's ashamed in front of his mom? Shut your mouth right now." The son flinched and froze. It must have been the first time in his life he had seen his father's expression. It wasn't just anger. It was the desperate face of someone whose insides had been turned upside down. My husband stomped into the master bedroom, and the door slammed shut. The son remained frozen on the sofa, unable to say a word, while I stood there, clutching my phone tightly. A certain word wouldn't leave my mind. Surely not. That night, when I lay down next to my husband, he spoke first. "You know you've been acting a bit strange lately, right?" I didn't answer. "Go see a doctor." That short remark was all he said. It was a long time before I could finally speak. "Yeah, I understand." I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Losing myself would be okay, but I was so terrified that I might forget the faces of my child, my husband, and my family. On the day we were scheduled to go to the hospital, my husband volunteered to go with me. It happened to be his day off from his security job. He woke up in the morning and changed into his going-out clothes without saying a word. "You can go alone," I declined, but my husband simply threw out a single remark. I didn't ask any further questions. It was a neurology appointment. While we were waiting after registering, my husband remained silent the entire time. He would pick up his phone, put it back down, check his watch, and then stare blankly elsewhere while I sat beside him with my hands resting quietly on my knees. My heart kept pounding. It's probably nothing. I'm just getting old and forgetful. I don't know how many times I repeated that to myself. There were various tests. They asked this and that, followed by a memory test. Then, at a certain question, I completely froze. I was sure I knew the answer, but the words wouldn't come out of my mouth. My hands trembled. My husband was waiting outside the examination room. As I went inside alone, I found myself thinking of my husband outside for no reason. I was worried about how anxious he must be outside. My husband accompanied me to the room where we heard the results. The doctor said many things, but to be honest, I didn't hear everything. Only the phrase early-stage dementia stuck in my ears. The rest just drifted away. My husband asked the doctor something, but even his voice felt distant to me. My mind was elsewhere. We left the hospital. The sunlight was exceptionally dazzling. Strangely, that remains in my memory. That the sunlight was unusually bright that day. My husband said quietly, "Let's eat before we go." I shook my head. "Let's stop by the market first. We need to buy ingredients for side dishes." My husband looked at me for a moment, then walked to the market with me without a word. At the market, I bought meat. It was meat my son had loved since he was little. I bought plenty of meat for bulgogi and spicy stir-fried pork, put it in a black plastic bag, and carried it out. My husband looked at the bag, and neither did I look at him. We simply walked side by side. A mother returning home with meat ingredients for her son's side dishes after being diagnosed with early-stage dementia. I honestly don't know what it means to be a mother. I came home and lay down in the master bedroom. I was so tired. I couldn't tell if it was my body or my mind. I lay there staring at the ceiling, then quietly closed my eyes. After a while, I got up and went into the bathroom. I stood in front of the sink and looked in the mirror. The moment our eyes met, tears gushed out. Afraid the sound would escape, I covered my mouth with both hands. A sob escaped, though. The more I tried to stop it, the more the sobs burst forth. Why did I get this disease? What on earth did I do wrong? Did I just live my life wrong? All sorts of thoughts washed over me like waves. Then I thought of my son. That immature son, that pathetic little brat. And yet, I was worried about him. What would happen to him if I were gone? Love him or hate him, he is my child. Will he even be eating properly? I wasn't afraid of the disease. I was afraid of leaving my family behind. I slumped onto the bathroom floor, covered my mouth, and cried for a long time. How much time had passed? I got up, washed my face, and looked in the mirror again. My eyes were swollen. I patted the corners of my eyes with cold water a few times, opened the bathroom door, and stepped out. I went to the kitchen, took the meat I had bought out of the refrigerator, and started preparing dinner as if nothing had happened. It was after dinner that I was doing the dishes. My husband got up from his seat and walked toward our son's room. I stopped what I was doing and listened intently. There was a knock. I'm coming in. A moment later, along with the sound of the door opening, I heard my husband's clear, heavy voice. Mom went to the hospital today. They said it feels like dementia. A brief silence followed. Please, pull yourself together now. If you can't do it, go live like a stranger. This isn't the time for me to be doing this. My husband's voice was trembling. It wasn't an angry voice. It was like a final plea that he couldn't continue like this anymore. A moment later, our son began to cry. At first, he sniffled softly, but the sound gradually grew louder. The child, who had never cried in front of his father in his life, was sobbing uncontrollably, his shoulders shaking. I could no longer hear my husband's voice. My husband also seemed unable to find the words to speak. I held my hands, which had been half-washed, and stood frozen in place. Water dripped from my fingertips. My footsteps led me to the living room. I went to my son's room and leaned against the door. From inside, I could hear my son's wails and my husband's low sighs. Stupid, I covered my mouth again. I thought I had finished crying in the bathroom earlier, but the tears would not stop flowing. Our new family member was crying together, separated only by that thin door. After a while, he came into the room. My husband turned off the light and lay down. But we both knew it. That sleep had already fled far away. Breaking the heavy silence after a long time, a low voice emerged from the darkness. You were sick, and I didn't know. I'm so sorry for not noticing all this time. I stared blankly at the dark ceiling and replied calmly, How would you know? I didn't know either. I just thought it was because I was getting old. My husband remained silent. Then, he carefully reached up and placed my hand on it. Unable to grip it tightly, he merely rested it cautiously, and that hand was trembling slightly. I did not pull my hand away and left it there. I have made you suffer your whole life. He took a short breath and continued. Your hands were so delicate when you first got married, but they were ruined because you didn't work behind my back. You didn't work behind the factory back. Just when I thought you might finally let me rest, you ruined the business and made a man of humble origins handle the grills in a restaurant. My husband's voice grew increasingly choked with emotion. You have suffered so much since meeting me. I have committed a grave sin for making you live your whole life without ever being able to let your heart flow, meeting a worthless man who can't even say sorry. A suppressed sob echoed from the darkness. That man, who had seemed like a colossal giant and never shed a single tear in front of me, was biting his lip and weeping silently. I held his hand. My rough hand covered his, which had grown rough from working as a security guard. My husband shed hot tears onto the back of my hand. My hand quickly became damp. I can't do without you. So please, don't forget me before I do. I am nothing without you. For the rest of my life. Got it? That's enough. It was the first heart-wrenching confession my taciturn husband, who knew nothing but those words, had ever offered me. I held his hand tightly and thought to myself, yes, I won't leave you behind. Even if all my memories vanish, my body will remember the temperature of your tears. And so, my husband and I wept together through the long night in the darkness, holding each other's rough hands. After that day, my son changed. It wasn't that he had completely transformed overnight. At first, he simply spent a little more time coming out of his room. The child, who used to hide in his room as soon as he finished eating, sat at the dining table a bit longer. He didn't say a word. He just sat there blankly. I didn't go out of my way to speak to him either. I simply stayed by his side. That unique presence was a new beginning for us. It was one morning. I was packing my medicine. It was medication prescribed by the hospital. I was supposed to take it every morning, but lately I had been forgetting quite often. Then, my son came out of his room, walked into the kitchen, and picked up the medicine bottle without a word. He opened the compartment marked with today's date and quietly placed a pill on my palm. "Mom, your medicine." That was all? Then he turned around and went to wash his face. I stared down at the pill in my palm for a long time. Don't cry. If you cry, the child will feel sorry. Repeating this to myself, I quickly swallowed the pill along with a glass of water. Finally, the monitor in my son's room went off. One night, I noticed that the flickering the wisp-like light that used to seep through the crack in the door had vanished. Even though it was past 10 p.m., the room was eerily silent. My husband and I exchanged glances in the living room. We didn't say a word. We just pretended to give in and fixed our eyes on the television. It was quiet the next day, and the day after that as well. The sickening sounds of video games and the stifling noise of cryptocurrency YouTube videos were no longer heard. My son was extinguishing his own mirage and getting ready to step outside. It was a few days later that he left the house. It was 4 a.m. As I was about to go to the bathroom, I saw my son at the entrance, burying his shoelaces tightly. "Where are you going?" My silent son lifted his head. "I'm trying to work as a temporary day laborer at a logistics center." I couldn't say a word. I wanted to say something, anything, but I just held back. "Okay, be careful on your way." The door was quietly scratched. I stared blankly at the scratched door for a long time. He must have been physically exhausted at first. After all, whenever he came home from work, he would fall asleep as soon as he sat on the sofa, unable to move an inch. There were times when he looked so worn out he could barely swallow his food. I pretended not to notice, heated the soup hotter, and quietly pushed the meat side dish closer to him. My son silently emptied his bowl of rice. It was one evening. I noticed my son's hands as he rested his arms on the table. His knuckles were swollen. There were scratches all over the back of his hands, and rough calluses had formed before I knew it. Looking at those hands, I suddenly thought of my husband. They looked exactly like his hands from his younger days, when he worked in a factory, getting his hands dirty with grease while handling machinery. I didn't say, "It seems this child is finally becoming a real adult." I simply swallowed my feelings of pride and guilt inside. Father and son remained silent. They rarely even made eye contact at the dinner table. However, the atmosphere was no longer the cool, chilly air of the past. If the silence of the past was a wall turning away from one another, now it felt like a comma, silently acknowledging each other's hard work. When the sound of my son coming home from work was heard, I saw my husband stop watching the channel he was on and listen intently. When my son greeted him, saying, "I'm home," my husband gave a slight nod instead of answering. Then he quietly asked, "Did you eat?" My son paused for a moment. "No, not yet." "Okay, wash up and come out to eat." That was all. I watched him from the kitchen and smiled to myself. That small gesture from my husband and the single word he bravely spoke brought me even greater comfort. On the weekend, the three of us went for a walk. My son was the first to suggest, "Mom, let's go get some fresh air." My husband pretended to give in and got dressed for going out. We walked side by side in the neighborhood park. My husband walked ahead, and my son finished walking beside me. Then, my son quietly took my hand. I was startled. I wondered when the last time this grown-up child had held my hand was. I didn't say anything. I simply held his rough hand tightly. My husband, who was walking ahead, glanced back. He must have seen us holding hands. Without showing any emotion, he looked straight ahead again and walked, but his pace slowed noticeably. I really appreciated his thoughtfulness in matching our pace so we wouldn't fall behind. Even while working at the logistics center, my son began looking for a job at night where he could utilize his major. After all, he was originally a competent engineer. "Mom polished up your resume a bit. I'm going to try applying again from the bottom up, even if it's just for a small or medium-sized company." At those words, my eyes welled up with tears, but I held them back. Yes, it will work out, because he is my son. I wanted to add more words, but I held them back again and again. I was afraid my worries would become a burden to a child trying to stand on his own 2 feet. I think I finally realized that parents can do nothing but silently believe in their children. My memories are now fading little by little. Some days pass by without a care, but on others, I can't even remember why I'm in the kitchen. I sometimes ask my husband the same thing he just said. But it is okay. Every morning, my son prepares my medicine, and in the evening, our new family sits together to eat. To me right now, this is everything, more precious than anything in the world. It is only after living my whole life that I realize that a child is not clay that I mold according to my will. I used to think that unconditionally wrapping and embracing someone was the only form of love, but that wasn't the case. Sometimes I had to teach him with words, and other times I had to push him to the edge of a cliff so he could soar on his own. I keep regretting that I failed to properly fulfill that role under the name of a parent. Still, seeing my child now striving to stand on his own 2 feet so firmly, it is okay if my memories fade little by little. Because my son is rising again like that. It was one evening. My son sat right beside me and held my hand again. "Mom?" "Yes." "Hunmin. I will remember you, Mom." Don't try to struggle to remember everything anymore. Just remember what you want to remember. At those words, I couldn't answer for a long time. The saying that love remains, even when memories fade, those words finally resonate in my heart. My son's hand was so big and warm. That warmth was exactly like my husband's hand in my younger days. That is enough. Truly, that is sufficient. Thank you for listening to my voice until the very end. I hope the story I shared earlier has left a small resonance in a corner of your heart. I hope your daily lives are always completely peaceful, and I sincerely thank you for taking the time to stay with us until the end.